Hello and welcome to my shop. My name is George and I'm coming to you from Chelsea, Quebec. Today I'd like to tell you about this workbench tool. It's basically a Moxon vise with a twist. So the special deal with Moxon vises is that the screws are at the ends. There aren't any screws down here. So if you need to work a panel or a frame at a low position, you can slip it through all the way down, and then for something like planing, this is an ideal level to do the job. So that's how it's like a Moxon vise, and there are dozens and dozens of YouTube videos that show you how to put a Moxon vise together. The twist in this one is that it's adjustable. So all of the Moxon vises that I've seen have two screws at the ends in fixed positions. But sometimes you'll want to work a piece that doesn't eat up the full span of the vise. And what I like to do is have the second screw be closer to the length of the workpiece. And what this one lets you do is remove the back screw and put it in a different position so that the clamping pressure doesn't need to be as great, and the benefit of that is that the chop therefore doesn't have to be that fat. You don't need 4 inches of hardwood in order to hold this thing in place. So this isn't going to be a build video. Instead, I'll just talk about this thing, I'll describe it, and I'll leave it to you to construct your own in ways that make sense to you. So you can probably find some scrap lumber in your own shop that'll take care of the job. A couple of pieces in the neighborhood of 3 feet long would be enough. If you do have to buy lumber for the construction of this thing, then a single 2x4 would be enough. So let me describe the construction of this. There's 2 pieces of construction lumber. Now they've been squared up using a jointer, a planer, table saw. Now it just happens from the scrap lumber that I had that the piece here in the back was originally a 2x6 and the one in the front was originally a 2x4. But two 2x4s would work just as well. Now the back piece is screwed into the edge of the workbench with wood screws, and a large number of them. I think they're every 3 or 4 inches. Before screwing it in, though, I bored a 1/2 inch hole through the back piece, and on this side I bored a larger hole that would fit a nut. Now the bolts are 1/2 inch bolts, and so the nuts are 1/2 inch nuts. And so I made a recess here in the back that the nut would fit into and get trapped. In fact, the order of boring is I bored partway through first for the nut, and then completed the through hole for the 1/2 inch bolt. Okay, so there's a nut here, and then there's another nut 8 inches down from that, and then nuts after that at 4 inch intervals. So one here, one here, one here. And so every one of those trapped nuts, of course, there's through holes bored through. The front board has only the 1/2 inch holes bored through. And I think that would have been enough. The other thing that I added that I haven't used much yet, but I might get used to using it, is a wedge here at the end bolt. And what this wedge was designed to do, it was designed so that I could quickly tighten up on a workpiece and then release it. And it's possible that I will start using it in time, but right now I'm not very good at it, so I'm just tightening by turning these little plastic wrenches. So let me give you a couple of arbitrary numbers that I settled on, but your numbers may vary. I typically work 3/4 inch material, and it's important that you engage a good number of threads in that hidden nut. So in my case, the good bolt length is 3.5 inches. If I have very much thicker material than this to plane, then I'll go out and buy myself another set of bolts, maybe some 4.5s or 5s, whatever it takes for the thicker material. But there's also a range that I can work with here. So if I have something that's considerably thinner than 3/4 of an inch, now you'd think, okay, something thinner, I'll end up bottoming out on my bolt. And that's why I made these things. These are just fat plastic washers, and I can stick them in here. And what that does is make the working range shorter for this set of bolts. So that's one thing by way of dimensions. Another thing, another numerical value that I can throw at you is that when I use the end bolt over here, I can accommodate 28 inches of width. And that's pretty darn good, I think, for a Moxon vise. Now, when I do have a panel that I want to work, what I'll do is adjust the position of the bolts to just accommodate the long side. But then when I want to flip it and work on the short side, I just turn it around and use it as is. Okay, I don't bother readjusting it for the short side. And that seems to work well enough. Now I used spruce construction lumber, figuring that if I'm working hardwoods, then I want the vise not to dent it, so I would use something softer. If you do use hardwood, consider lining it with leather. That'll give you a better grip for the pressure that you put on. And of course it'll protect any sensitive surfaces. So here are a couple of pointers for building one of these things. One thing is to try to make sure that whatever adjustment mechanism you have, it doesn't stick out too much. Now I do have this thing sticking out over here, but it's just a peg that holds this end up for when I want to change the position of the far screw. So ordinarily this isn't here. And the reason I'm making that recommendation is because when you want to plane, you will want to keep your body close to the edge of the vise. I had earlier designs with a pipe clamp head. I had one where there was a long threaded mechanism on the outside, and you just can't plane if you have to do this all the time, no matter how elegant that looks. So that's one pointer. The other pointer I have is whatever your handedness is, mount it at the other side of the bench. So I'm right-handed, I plane like this, and so my end stop is at the left end of the bench. So if you're left-handed, put it over there. And this bolt, I don't move it. The reason for that is because if I'm planing, let's say I'm removing, actually that's the actual job that I'm doing right now. If I'm removing the splines after glue, the splines have been sawn off, and they still need to be taken down a little bit with the plane. So if that's the job at hand, then I want to plane in this direction for this set of splines, but I want to plane from that direction for this set. So my ordinary way of working is to plane from right to left. And because I have my fixed bolt at the end of the bench, I can also come around to this side and quite comfortably go after the splines at this end. So those are two tips that I'd encourage. One is to keep stuff as close to the board as possible down here, and the second one is to have your fixed position at the end that's different from your handedness. In other words, if you're right-handed, go left. If you're left-handed, go right. Right then, let me give you a closer look at what I've got applying the pressure on this device. So a half-inch bolt along with the washer. Half-inch would be working out to 12 or 13 millimeters, depending on what's standard in metric. And then I also 3D printed these little plastic wrenches because, as I said, I'm not a fan of fetching a tool every time I want to make an adjustment. I'd much rather have the tool sitting at the whatever the tool is that I'm working with. So I've got screwdrivers on my table saw, screwdrivers on my dust collector. So I just 3D printed these little plastic wrenches. So there's a hex shape, and then at the back there's a little bit of a ring that closes down to keep the head from going through, or actually it's to keep the wrench from falling off altogether. So a little plastic printed wrench and a washer, and then, as you've already heard, there's a nut trapped at this end. And then sometimes if you want to work a narrow piece, you'll want to close up the space a little bit and still have a good working range for how many threads are engaged in the nut. So to accomplish that, I made some fat washers that look like this, and you could use regular washers just as readily. So a fat washer goes in, then the regular washer, and now this bolt can close up a much more narrow space than the usual 3/4 of an inch that I use. So thank you for sticking it through all the way to this end. Make some time for your passion and share it.